everyone, and thank you for joining the Center for Learning Health System Sciences for our monthly impact seminar. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few expectations. Today's seminar will be recorded. You can enable closed captioning by hitting the Show Captions buttons next to the Raise Hand option in the Zoom menu. The public slide deck will also be made available on our website under the Education tab, and I will post the link in the chat along with a short questionnaire asking for seminar and topic speaker suggestions, which we would greatly appreciate. Following the presentation, we invite you to raise your hand or type questions in the Q&A. And in particular, we welcome questions exploring the many dimensions of impacts that these ideas, technologies, and practices have on learning health systems. As a reminder for upcoming LHS events, our next impact seminar will take place on Tuesday, May 2nd, with Dr. Eun Liu, Director for the Institute for Augmented Intelligence in Medicine, Center for Collaborative AI in Healthcare, and Associate Professor of Preventative Medicine at Northwestern University. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Mary Butler to introduce our speaker.
Hello, everyone. I can't tell you how happy I am to be introducing Dr. Priyanka Desai. She's serving as a senior research scientist in the Health Sciences Department at NORC at the University of Chicago. I should say NORC, shouldn't I? She has over a decade of experience in health services research with methodological expertise in systematic review and qualitative research. Dr. Desai leads projects and tasks focused on implementation science, patient-centered outcomes research, and clinical decision support. Currently, she leads NORC's work for the Maryland Statewide Prevention and Reduction Collaborative, also known as SPARC, a qualitative improvement project among public health academics and acute care hospitals. Dr. Desai also serves as the co-lead for the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality funded Clinical Decision Support Innovation Collaborative, Stakeholder Community, and Outreach Center. She's also supported several projects for PCORI by planning and conducting literature reviews, key informant review, interviews, surveys, webinars, and technical expert panels. Dr. Desai holds an MSPH in public policy from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and a PhD from our University of Minnesota School of Public Health in Health Services Research Policy and Administration. And prior to joining NORC and during her PhD training, Priyanka worked with me at the Minnesota Evidence-Based Practice Center, where she contributed to a number of evidence synthesis projects. She's a co-author on several of those reviews that were funded by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, and a lead author for a meta-research paper on bipolar disorder research. And she was just instrumental to many projects and a really valued contributor and collaborator. Her talk is entitled, Patient-Centered Clinical Decision Support. What have we learned and where do we go next? And so with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Priyanka Desai.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Mary. It is great to see you and to present to this group here today. So as Mary said, I am a senior research scientist at NORC. And for those who may not be familiar with NORC, we are an objective, nonpartisan research organization. And so the findings I'm going to share today in terms of clinical decision support is based on work that NORC has done on clinical decision support, or CDS, for projects funded by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, or ARC. And as she mentioned, I'm the co-lead for the Clinical Decision Support Innovation Center, Stakeholder Center, which I'll discuss a little bit later today. So in terms of what I'll cover as part of my presentation today, first I thought it would be useful to go over PCCDS in terms of what we mean when we say patient-centered CDS, and talk about the patient-centered clinical decision support lifecycle. Next, I'll talk about challenges and opportunities for patient-centered clinical decision support based on findings we have gathered through NORC's work under our patient-centered outcomes research clinical decision support initiative, or their PCOR CDS initiative. Then I'll talk about where we go next, highlighting what the Clinical Decision Support Innovation Collaborative is doing and the work, how it is exactly addressing some of the challenges and opportunities that PC-CDS fits into a vision for our learning health system. I'm hoping that I leave plenty of time for discussion and Q&A from this group. So I'll dive in and talk about first an overview of patient-centered clinical decision support. So before we talk about patient-centered clinical decision support, I thought it'd be useful to just recap what is clinical decision support. So decision support generally comes in a range of formats, but when we talk about clinical decision support or CDS for the work we do, we are really focusing on electronically based tools that help care teams, patients, caregivers make informed evidence-based healthcare decisions. And that can come in a range of formats, as you can see on screen. That can be reminders, alerts, or order sets. And within the field of CDS, we have an established framework called the CDS 5 rights. And so this helps us think about what CDS should do. And those 5 rights are delivering the right information to the right people, through the right channels, in the right format, and at the right time. And so traditionally, CDS has been delivered within the healthcare setting and clinician facing. For example, a clinician receives an EHR alert based on patient lab data. But increasingly, CDS is moving to be more patient facing and in a format where decision support tools are directly in the hands of patients and or their caregivers. So that brings us to patient-centered CDS. So patient-centered clinical decision support, or PC-CDS, is CDS that supports care for individual patients or specific patient populations and significantly incorporates patient-centered factors related to knowledge, data, delivery, and their use. So you see that on the screen in terms of our 4 patient factors, and I'll just unpack those briefly. So when we talk about knowledge, we're talking about PC-CDS that is based on comparative effectiveness research or patient-centered outcomes research that incorporates outcomes and measures that are meaningful to patients. And so when we talk about data, we're talking about PC-CDS that may be further informed by data generated directly from patients. So that could be patient-generated health data, including patient-reported outcomes, patient preference information, or non-clinical patient-centric information, such as social determinants of health. And then we have delivery. So when we talk about delivery, we're talking about directly engaging patients and or their caregivers across different settings. And that can take on many forms. So I know on the screen you see generally through apps and patient portals. So patient engagement and PC-CDS could include direct alerts, apps that transmit patient-driven health data or PGHD to clinicians, patient-reported outcomes submitted through an app or the patient portal, and patient preferences collected electronically during a clinical visit or outside of a clinical visit. And then we have use. So when we think about PC-CDS, we ultimately envision it being used to support not just healthcare decision-making, but shared decision-making. So a process where patients and caregivers and care teams can come together, share and discuss health information, and use patients' values and preferences to reach mutually acceptable healthcare decisions. And so PC-CDS exists on a continuum that reflects the degree to which its knowledge-based data, delivery, and use focus on patient movement experiences. And so NORC previously conducted a Horizon scan to better understand the landscape of PC-CDS. And one thing we found is that PC-CDS is typically used in 4 ways, which are displayed on screen. So first we have prevention, and most often this is the form of a prompt for a risk assessment or a screening. Then we have diagnosis, and when we talk about diagnosis, it's important to keep in mind that PC-CDS tools are not designed to give a definitive diagnosis. So when PC-CDS is used in this way, it is most often about symptom monitoring or screening. And then we have management. So we've seen examples of PC-CDS being used to manage chronic conditions, support medication adherence. We also see a lot of examples of PC-CDS being used to mitigate the chances of drug-drug interactions. And then we have treatment. So again, thinking about shared decision-making, another use of PC-CDS is to facilitate conversations about treatment decisions, ideally shared decision-making discussions. So next we have our PC-CDS lifecycle. And here you'll see 3 phases. I know this is a busy diagram, so I'm just going to generally walk you through the lifecycle and our 3 phases. So we start off with knowledge generation, then we have clinical decision support, and healthcare delivery. So the knowledge generation phase is where evidence-based guidelines are developed from patient-centered outcomes research or comparative effectiveness research or other data sources. And then we get into the clinical decision support phase. And that's where these evidence-based guidelines are then converted into computable knowledge or CDS artifacts, which form the basis of the clinical decision support that is delivered to the patient. And we see here that information delivery step, or the provider using the CDS-5 right. And then in the healthcare delivery phase, based on that CDS, the patient and provider make clinical decisions and ideally engage in a shared decision-making activity which results in specific patient behaviors. And this is where the CDS lifecycle really intersects with the patient's life flow, because along with after making their decision and these patient behaviors, they're going to execute the decision, they're going to take self-care actions, they're going to engage in their daily activities. And this leads to specific outcomes. And so the other thing I would point you to in this life cycle diagram is that the patient is really at the center of this diagram and has a role to play in all phases. And central to this concept of how we envision PCCDS, you see these data sources that I highlighted before as we walk through the patient-centered factors. But I think it's good to emphasize here as well is that we have patient data, patient preference data, patient-generated health data, including patient-reported outcomes and social determinants of health. The next, what have we learned about PCCDS? And so we have conducted a range of activities that have formed our understanding of the landscape of PCCDS. That includes a horizon scan, an evaluation of ARC's PCORE CDS initiative, and 2 pilots of PCCDS. And so the PCCDS landscape is complex, it is vast, and there are a range of challenges and opportunities for advancing it. But generally, what we have observed in our work is that these challenges generally come kind of coalesce or group around 4 common themes. So you see those on the screen here. So we have lack of trust and transparency in PCCDS tools, limited patient involvement in PCCDS development, gaps in interoperability standards for PCCDS, and limited measurement of clinical outcomes. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to briefly discuss aspects of each challenge and highlight some opportunities. So first, we have trust and transparency. So a key challenge in trust related to PCCDS that we found is that patients and clinicians lack trust in PCCDS, and more specifically, they may be uncertain about the safety and effectiveness of decision support tools. And this is a critical challenge. If people don't trust the tools, they're not going to use them. They're going to override the alerts, their recommendations. So the question is, how do we address this? As you can see from the illustration on the screen, at the bottom of the slide, there are things that we can do as we translate evidence and develop PCCDS. So what does that mean? It means that first we need to bring greater transparency to how PCCDS is developed from clinical guidelines. And this includes providing metadata about CDS tools so that people understand the underlying data sources and the evidence that is being used for these tools. Second, we need to ensure that health apps and other PCCDS tools meet safety and quality criteria. And I think that point really intersects with the third point, in terms of developing guidance on best practices or a rating system to ensure that health apps meet established criteria. Ultimately, patients and providers need to have confidence in the validity and effectiveness of health apps and other PCCDS tools. Which brings us to another key challenge that we've observed as it relates to trust and transparency, which is that patients and clinicians may have concerns regarding the privacy and security of patient data when data are collected by apps or other PCCDS tools. So I think I pointed out before as we walk through the life cycle and we talk about the patient-centered factors that are key to PCCDS, our vision of these patient-centered clinical decision support tools is that they incorporate patient preference data, patient-reported outcomes and other PGHD, social determinants of health. So if we are going to incorporate this data and ask for this data, patients and clinicians must trust that the data they share through these tools is secure and remains private. So what we have found is that a lack of clarity around data ownership is a key challenge in using patient-contributed or patient-generated health data. For example, a patient may opt into sharing their data for one purpose, like making a treatment decision, but may not be given an opportunity to opt out of secondary uses of their information. So like the opportunities I shared on the previous slide, we need increased transparency, the development of safeguards to protect privacy. And this includes developing transparent data collection and exchange practices for patient data. So next we'll go to patient input. And as we think about patient input in PCCDS and PCCDS development, what we have observed is that there is limited patient involvement and meaningful patient input throughout the PCCDS development cycle. And patient engagement is really critical to ensuring that PCCDS reflects the needs, desires, and expectations of patients. And if we're going to put PCCDS and these tools directly in the hands of patients, we want to make sure it's meeting those expectations and it works within their life flow. So how do we address this? As you can see from the illustration, there's things we can do during the PCCDS design, development, and implementation process. And that's what's listed under the future direction. So first, we can make this a priority within CDS development and implementation. So that's really making sure that the broader CDS community is on board with this vision of patient involvement and patient engagement in a meaningful way to develop CDS tools. Second, we need to involve patients, ideally at the beginning of the research process. And then finally, we need to engage in co-design activities with patients. So co-design can take on many forms. That could be a focus group to inform development. That could be having patients review and provide feedback on supporting documentation. That could be having patients test functionality and use of CDS tools. But the goal here is to really meaningfully engage patients throughout the development process to ensure that these tools meet their needs. And continuing on with patient input, we also have to consider, as I mentioned before, that PCCDS has to consider patient life flows. So how does the technology fit into their daily lives? And right now, we really see that PCCDS development doesn't necessarily consider this in a meaningful way. So that links back to the concept of the 5 rights, which is shown at the bottom of the slide. As we think about PCCDS and we think about how it fits within patients' lives, we need to make sure it's delivered in the right format, through the right channel, at the right time, to meet their needs within their life flows. So how do we achieve this? We need to consider how PCCDS can be delivered through multiple modalities. And a key part of this is enhancing mechanisms to share information between apps and EHRs, and linking back to some of the other discussions about patient data sharing on the previous slides. We also need to create workflows that allow for the sharing of patient-generated health data. And so creating these workflows and sharing information between apps and EHRs will require interoperability standards. And that brings us to the third area, or third key theme that we see in the challenges in the PCCDS landscape. So we have devices and wearables that are generating a great deal of health information, which is great. But capturing them in a standardized way and visualizing that data so that it is meaningful for clinical decision making is a pretty significant challenge. So we need further research into standards for capturing, curating, and integrating patient-generated data into EHRs and patient portals. And while some standards exist, there are key gaps. So I think that research needs to cover both what is available and how do we address the gaps in standards for being able to really leverage that PGHD in a meaningful way. We also need ways to capture and integrate patient preference data, which can inform how patients want to receive information and make decisions, as well as what healthcare decisions they will ultimately make. So while some standards exist for capturing patient preferences, there are still many gaps that need to be filled to capture the full range of patient preferences that can inform and are relevant to PCCDS. And finally, we have our last thematic area in terms of measurement. And specifically, we lacked information on PCCDS measurement and how PCCDS impacts clinical outcomes, as well as studies that explore patient engagement and workflow impact. And this information is really critical to understanding the effectiveness of PCCDS. As you think about that life cycle diagram, the health outcome steps fed right back into the life cycle. So we need the outcome measurement information to feed into the development life cycle and help inform future planning for PCCDS. So how do we address this? Thinking back to what I shared about patient input, we need to engage patient and caregivers at each steps of the measurement process. So that's selecting outcomes, designing studies, contextualizing results. And I think this ties into our second bullet about engaging patients that in a meaningful way. And by engaging patients in a meaningful way, it'll allow us to select meaningful and targeted outcome measures for PCCDS studies. So finally, we need research that examines how PCCDS engages patients to understand more effective ways to engage patients through PCCDS and whether the PCCDS that we are currently designing is engaging patients the way we intended to. So I've shared some challenges and opportunities, and so the question is, where do we go next? And that brings us to the Clinical Decision Support Innovation Collaborative. But before I dive into that, I just wanted to recap where we are. So you see that on the left-hand side. So we have made significant progress in the development and implementation of PCCDS. But we also have some things we need to improve upon, which I just recapped. So then we have where we need to be. So at a high level, we need to improve patient and clinician trust in PCCDS tools. We need patient engagement and co-design in PCCDS. We need industry-wide standards for PGHD collection, transfer, and EHR innovation. And we need research that measures patient-centered and clinical outcomes. So how do we get here? How do we get from where we are to where we need to be? And this is where the Clinical Decision Support Innovation Collaborative, or the CDSC, fits in. So I'm not going to read the entire slide to you, but right here you have our mission statement for the Clinical Decision Support and Innovation Collaborative. So the CDSIC is part of ARC's Core CDS initiative. And the CDSIC is one piece of the broader initiative for ARC, which aims to advance evidence into practice through CDS and to make CDS more shareable, standards-based, and publicly available. And you see that initiative's mission reflected in the Innovation Collaborative's mission in terms of the goal of the CDSIC is to advance PCCDS that is evidence-based, shareable, interoperable, and publicly available. And we are doing this by creating a learning community that fosters collaboration across different stakeholders in the CDS ecosystem to promote the practice and adoption of PCCDS and advance standards-based PCCDS. And one thing to highlight about this innovation collaborative is that everything we do within the CDSIC is very much stakeholder-driven, which allows us to develop products, reports, resources, practical tools that address key gaps within the field, while also being responsive to the full range of end users that exist within the CDS ecosystem. So we have 3 centers within the CDSIC. We have an operations center that convenes the steering committee every other month to provide strategic direction to the innovation collaborative as a whole. We have a stakeholder center that convenes 4 work groups with 8 to 10 members and 2 work group leads every month. And then we also have an innovation center that convenes the planning committee on a quarterly basis. So we do a key aspect of this innovation collaborative, perhaps by name because it's called a collaborative, is to really engage the stakeholders across the CDS ecosystem to address some of the key gaps that I just highlighted. So I'm going to focus next on the stakeholder center and the innovation center and provide a bit more information about those 2 centers are doing. So the CDSIC Stakeholder Center convenes 4 work groups. And as I previously mentioned, I co-lead the center. And each work group has a specific area of focus and is developing 3 product sets within that focus area. So we have the CDS Outcomes and Objectives work group. And that work group is really addressing this question. What is CDS trying to achieve and what outcomes we need to measure to support this? So this work group is really broadly thinking about the safety and effectiveness of PCCDS and thinking about what outcome measures are needed to effectively measure and track the safety and effectiveness of PCCDS tools. Then we have our Standards and Regulatory Frameworks work group. And this work group is really looking at the current state of standards and regulatory frameworks, thinking about gaps, thinking about where further development is needed of standards, and that's reflected on the question you see on screen. What is needed to advance the adoption and use of standards for the development of PCCDS? And then we have our Trust and Patient Centeredness work group. And this work group is focusing on fostering trust and transparency in the processes of PCCDS design, development, testing, implementation, and use. And then last but certainly not least, we have our scaling, measurement, and dissemination work group. And that work group is thinking about how we advance the implementation and use of CDS and ensure that we have standardized measures to track it. So while our outcomes and objectives work group is thinking about safety and effectiveness, and outcome measures like clinical outcomes and patient-reported outcomes, our scaling, measurement, and dissemination work group is thinking about process measures, workflow measures, and then also thinking about process measurement related that are also patient-centered. So thinking about the patient experience as it relates directly using the CDS tools. And then next we have our Innovation Center. And the Innovation Center is really the research hub for the CDSIC. It consists of 2 cores that are conducting innovative projects regarding real-world applications for PCCDS. So core 1 is the measurement core, and it conducts projects to standardize the measurement of all aspects of CDS and it's going to review CDS implementation to evaluate utility. Then we have core 2, which is conducting and coordinating CDS projects. And this core implements patient-centered clinical decision support projects in real-world settings and tests CDS design, development, monitoring, and evaluation strategies to identify best practices. So I will say across the Innovation Collaborative, we are doing a lot of interesting work related to PCCDS. We have 12 work group products, and then we also have 3 Innovation Center projects that are also developing a good deal of reports and supporting documentation to go along with these projects. So there are a lot of outputs coming from this Innovation Collaborative in terms of useful reports, practical tools, findings. But I wanted to highlight a couple that are most relevant to that where we need to be slide. So just a reminder, as I was presenting where we are and where we need to be, we have some key areas: improved patient and clinician trust in PCCDS tools, patient engagement and co-design in PCCDS, industry-wide standards for PGHD collection, transfer, and EHR integration, and then research that measures patient-centered and clinical outcomes. And no single tool, no single project can address every single aspect of these issues in a single report or a single project. But I think what is great about the CDSIC and the work that we are doing is that we do have a lot of work that is foundational to addressing these needs. So thinking about first improved patient and clinician trust in PCCDS tools. One of the things our trust and patient centeredness work group is doing is examining factors that influence the source credibility of PCCDS tools. So documenting both attributes of source credibility inherent to PCCDS tools, inherent to the people who are using the PCCDS tools, and also describing strategies to improve source credibility. And then in terms of patient engagement and co-design in PCCDS, our trust and patient centeredness work group is also developing guidebooks and handbooks for patient PCCDS co-design and incorporating patient-centered inputs throughout that PCCDS lifecycle. So these will be practical guidance, promising practices, if not yet best practices, because this is an evolving field. But the idea is that the work group will be developing and providing and aggregating information around how you co-design PCCDS or incorporate patient-centered input to help advance patient engagement and ensure that patient input is incorporated into PCCDS development. Then we have industry-wide standards for PGHD collection, transfer, and EHR integration. So one of the things that we're doing is identifying existing standards and opportunities for standards development around PGHD and other aspects of PCCDS development. And so that's a key step, I think, in terms of figuring out where we go next, first identifying what's out there, how it's being used, because part of this is both the adoption of standards and addressing gaps in standards. And then we also, through our Innovation Center, we're developing a prototype dashboard for presentation and analysis for PGHD. So that gets to a different aspect as we think about EHR integration. And one of the things I highlighted in terms of practical use of PGHD is we have a lot of data, which is great to have. It's great to have the ability to collect this information directly from patients and be able to incorporate in clinical decision making. But it's a large volume of data, and how do we visualize that? and make that useful to inform clinical decision making and healthcare decision making. And this prototype dashboard helps get us further to a point where we can use that PGHD in a meaningful way. And then we have research that measures patient-centered and clinical outcomes. And that was a key area in terms of where we need to be. So we have a lot of work on measurement going on in the Innovation Collaborative. So one of our Innovation Center cores is developing a PC-CDS measurement framework. So at a higher level, thinking about what do we need to measure in terms of measurement domains. Then we have our 2 work groups that are focused on different aspects of measurement. So from scaling, measurement, and dissemination, we are identifying process measures that assess patient CDS tool use and patient lifestyle impact. And then we also, through our outcomes and objectives work group, we are examining relevant outcomes and measures for PCCDS. And again, this isn't everything that the Innovation Collaborative is doing. We're doing lots of interesting work. Obviously, I have bias because I'm part of it. But I think this illustrates really how the CDSIC is tackling key challenges and opportunities that we've previously identified in the PC-CDS landscape, and ultimately providing, I think, really important resources for the CDS field to advance the use of PC-CDS in a meaningful way. And I will plug, we have a newly launched website. So you can see it on screen, and the address is on screen. And I think my colleague, Rena from NORC, will also be plopping it into the chat. So all of our reports, tools, and resources will be made publicly available on our website. And like I said, the address is there. If you have any interest in any of our work groups or potentially joining a work group, this would be a great resource to get familiar with what exactly we're doing under each work group. And then you could certainly reach out to us if that would be of interest to this group. But one thing I will plug is that I'm very excited to share we will be posting our first work group product. So I think I mentioned that we are identifying existing standards and opportunities for standards development. So one of the first things that will be coming out this month is an environmental stand from our standards and regulatory frameworks work group, which is really, I think, and again, I have a bit of a bias, but an excellent summary of the existing standards that are out there across multiple stages of the PC-CDS technical landscape, considering what is out there, whether it's being used, what gaps need to be filled, and also gives a really nice summary of the regulatory landscape for PC-CDS, thinking through legislation, initiatives, frameworks. So I think if that is of interest, look out for that report. I think it will be posted this month, and it is our first work group product from the Innovation Collaborative, with plenty more to come over the coming months. So finally, I just wanted to conclude my presentation with some final thoughts about PC-CDS and the learning health system. So as we think about the future of the PC-CDS landscape, this landscape is going to evolve. And so our vision of PC-CDS is going to evolve. And I think we are seeing certainly right now that PC-CDS is being put increasingly in the hands of patients and caregivers outside of the care setting. And I think that's certainly going to continue. And I think it's going to also continue to evolve as PC-CDS integrates patient-generated and patient-centric data. So thinking about, again, patient-reported outcomes, social determinants of health, patient preference data. There's a wealth of data available that can be incorporated into PC-CDS tools, as long as we have the standards and ability to use that data in a meaningful way. And then we have a future landscape of PC-CDS. And as we think about it, the future landscape of PC-CDS and the supportive systems around it should really support patients in developing skills and interests and knowledge to be active in healthcare decision-making, and particularly shared decision-making, to be a partner in their healthcare journey. And then also it should be, that landscape should support providers in implementing safe and effective care plans. So as we think about this vision of PC-CDS and the learning health system, we certainly see that this concept, our vision for PC-CDS, what we are trying to advance in terms of where we're trying to go, really aligns with those core principles of a learning health system in terms of gathering and applying evidence in real time, employing digital health tools to improve decision-making, including patients as vital members of the care team. I think we've certainly touched on that at multiple points, the desire for patient input at each step of the patient each step of the PC-CDS lifecycle, and also having patients participate in shared decision-making and using PC-CDS to support that, capturing and analyzing data and care experiences, and then assessing outcomes to refine processes and create feedback cycles, which certainly I think a lot of the work we're doing around measurement will hopefully facilitate in terms of the identifying available measures that can help inform those outcome assessment and those feedback processes. So that I'm happy to take any questions from the group.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Desai. We have a good solid 23 minutes for questions. You can either raise your hand or type your questions into the Zoom Q&A. We have a question from Sheila Maroney. She says, thank you for this important work. Regarding patient input, how do you gauge what is meaningful? Who assesses whether the patient input is meaningful or not?
That is a very good question. I think as we think about engaging patients and we think about principles of engaging patients, certainly barring from community-based participatory research and the work that Pcori is doing, I think we have established guidelines in terms of what we look for in terms of engaging patients meaningfully, regardless of what the discipline or the process is. So ensuring that they are equal partners in the research, ensuring that they feel respectful, they feel heard. Certainly there are things in terms of them providing their time and making sure we honor that time. So I think as we talk about meaningful patient engagement, I envision it, and I think as we think about the approach that our innovation collaborative has used in terms of engaging patients and the work we've done, in terms of following those principles to make sure that we are making sure that the patients feel like they have a seat at the table, that they're treated as equal partners, and that then that input is translated clearly. And I think that also includes in terms of meaningful patient engagement, providing transparency in how their input is used and informed into the work of either the innovation collaborative or PC-CDS development, in terms of there should be transparency in that process if we're engaging patients and asking them to give their time.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Yes. Rolly asks, he's curious, or they ask how the digital disparities are addressed in this work, specifically combinations of language and digital disparities.
That is a great question. So I will say, I think that we have spent some time thinking about digital disparities and how we address that in PC-CDS development, acknowledging that we have thinking about, as you've acknowledged in your question, there are different languages, different access to digital tools, different levels of comfort in using digital tools. It's not something that we have fully addressed, I think, in the initial work as a collaborative, but I think it's something that we certainly are thinking about in terms of future planning of what we do. So for some context, we are in the first iteration or kind of base period of the innovation collaborative, which has been 2 years, but we hope to continue for 3 more. And I think as we think about digital disparities or health equity and disparities in general, as we think about the delivery of healthcare and the role that PC-CDS plays, I think that's something that we're hoping to address certainly in future product planning.
Are there more questions? And also you can raise your hand if you just want to ask a question. Yes. Genevieve asks, has CDSIC/NORC been thinking about how to potentially crowdsource testing of patient-facing CDS?
So I will say, when you say crowdsourcing, are we thinking about testing the CDS tools themselves? I'm not sure if we've dived fully into that realm in terms of crowdsourcing of the tool. I will say that I think as we think about co-design methods, we have seen some literature around, for example, using social media engagement as an opportunity to crowdsource ideas around how needs for PC-CDS tools, how PC-CDS tools should be developed to inform a co-design process. We're not quite there in terms of crowdsourcing and testing patient-facing CDS, but I think that is a really interesting idea that Genevieve, I am going to bring that back to the innovation
Michelle asks, can you say more about what you hope to enable patients to do? Self-diagnosis and care or informed discussions with their providers? Also, what level of understanding do you assume patents have when creating content to manage confusion?
So I will say, I think when we envision,
Patients, not patents.
so when we think about enabling patients in terms of clinical decision support, I think we really envision it, as I said, as participating in a shared decision-making process. So I think informed discussions with their providers is kind of right in where we envision patient-centered CDS and thinking back to those patient-centered factors in terms of those key aspects of PC-CDS. I think that is something that we see really fundamental to our vision of PC-CDS. In terms of the other question, in terms of self-diagnosis, I'm not sure if we're quite there yet in terms of PC-CDS. I think it's an evolving landscape, but I think we really see this as being a tool that can be used to have those informed decisions within a clinical care setting and also informed decisions outside of a clinical care setting. So one thing that we have been thinking about in terms of PC-CDS and how it fits within the patient life flow is thinking about what happens both outside of healthcare encounters, between healthcare encounters, and during healthcare encounters. And certainly there's a role for PC-CDS to fit in all three of those. So thinking about outside of healthcare encounters, you're going to have a patient maybe interacting with the tool, asking questions, maybe using their patient portal to engage with their provider, gathering and generating health data. And that's where a PC-CDS intersects with the patient life flow outside of the healthcare encounter, between healthcare encounters, as we think about patients, executing healthcare decisions, living their daily lives, taking self-care actions. There's opportunity again to engage in PC-CDS tools, go back to that patient portal, provide data, ask questions, and then certainly during the healthcare encounter, we envision that there can be both patient and clinician-facing CDS that really support a shared decision-making process, as well as clinician-facing CDS that may prompt a conversation with the patient and lead to informed decision-making. So hopefully, Michelle, that answers your question in terms of what we hope to enable patients to do with PC-CDS.
Tim asks, when you say you want to expand engagement populations outside of healthcare, what groups are you targeting, including?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
When you say you want to expand engagement efforts with populations outside of healthcare, what groups are you targeting?
So I'm not sure we're looking to exchange engagement with populations outside of healthcare, but I think what we are looking to do is engage with a wide variety of people within the PC-CDS ecosystem or the CDS ecosystem. So we engage as part of our innovation collaborative, researchers, PC-CDS developers, EHR developers, patient advocates, payers. And I know some people are wearing a range of hats, and some people wear multiple identities. So I think our goal is to really engage and work with people across the CDS ecosystem to make sure we have a wide variety of perspectives, with the understanding that different end users have different needs and often are coming to the same topic with different perspectives.
Don asks, what evaluative methods do you intend to use for assessing the quality of evidence generated in current/future implementations of CDS interface effectiveness, including risks of harm?
So in terms of what we're doing around measurement right now is that we are actually exploring what measures are available. So in terms of CDS tools themselves, we're considering, process measures like is the CDS working appropriately as it's intended to do? Does the alert fire when it needs to? How is it being used within the workflow? Are clinicians using it? Are they adopting it? And also thinking that from a patient perspective, the usability and adoptability. We're thinking about patient satisfaction, clinician satisfaction, patient knowledge. And then we have another work group that's diving into those clinical outcomes. So thinking about, clinical outcomes, side effects, patient decisional conflict, patient-reported outcomes. So right now, our work is really focused on documenting and understanding the world of outcomes, universe of outcome measurement as it relates to PCCDS. And then I think the idea is that could inform future measurement of things that we do for the Innovation Center. So right now we're really exploring and establishing the foundation of measurement for PCCDS and developing inventories and practical tools that can help guide future work.
Are there additional questions for Dr. Desai? Going once. All right. Well, again, in closing, thank you all for joining today for the impact seminar. Please join us for our next seminar on May 2nd at noon Central Standard Time, where we will be joined by Dr. Yuan Liu. And this concludes our presentation. See you next time.